The global sweep of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 may change the course of human civilization forever. If we want to find a universal symbol of this global war against the virus, the most obvious and widespread visual of these unprecedented times is the face mask. In just a few months, mask production has soared. Once reserved for the medical profession, manufacturers have ramped up production to full capacity in order to meet the demand. In the first quarter of 2020, the global market for disposable masks was worth $75 million, and it's expected to grow more than 50% for the next 7 years. Instinctively, people cover their noses when they encounter a bad smell. But how did face masks develop? The history can be tracked to the 1300s. The plague, also called the Black Death, killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people. The deadliest pandemic in recorded human history. The beak mask became part of the doctor's uniform. The modern-day surgical mask originated in China. In October 1910, groundhogs in Siberia were the source of a plague that spread to Manchuria by Chinese laborers. The plague would sweep through northeast China. With a near 100% mortality rate, the disease killed 60,000 people. The Qing government dispatched Wu Lian-tai, deputy supervisor of the Tianjin Army Medical School, to take charge of the anti-epidemic campaign. He quickly realized that the pathogen was transmitted by droplets in the air. Immediately, he ordered widespread quarantines and that the bodies of the dead be burned. Within half a year, the plague was over. Wu Lian-tai left a legacy we are benefiting from today, the Wu-style mask. Personally designed by Wu, the mask consisted of 2 layers of gauze filled with medical-grade absorbent cotton in the middle. It was cheap, convenient, and efficient. Wu's mask made great strides in protecting the health of the entire country. The 1918 flu pandemic killed 50 million people worldwide. In the fight against the plague, mask wearing became more commonplace. But after the pandemic was over, mask wearing did not continue among the public. It wasn't until the outbreak of SARS in 2003 that mask wearing became more commonplace in Asia. COVID-19 has forced the rediscovery of masks beyond Asia. These days, there's probably nothing more frightening than the sound of someone coughing or sneezing in public. A cough is a protective reflex of the respiratory tract, compressing the air in the lungs into a jet stream more than 1 meter long. A cough carries more than 3,000 tiny droplets of water at a speed of more than 20 meters per second. A sneeze is even worse, an explosive spasm that mobilizes many muscle groups in the upper body. In each sneeze, 40,000 tiny droplets of air were spewed out at the speed of a Force 12 hurricane. People who are close to each other in the same room will inevitably inhale each other's droplets. The concept of aerosols is now widely known. It refers to the state in which solid or liquid particles remain suspended in the air. Dust fog and water droplets evaporate, leaving micron-sized particles of salt in the air, forming sea salt aerosols in the atmosphere. Every year, the ocean spreads 3.3 billion metric tons of salt into the air. Coughing and sneezing are like the human body's form of wind. But rather than ocean salt, we're spreading saliva, nasal mucus, and other secretions into dust fog and water droplets. Whether we're yelling or whispering, we're producing droplets both large and small. After evaporation, any virus in the droplets form into aerosols, suspended in the air. Compared to the sea, one person does not produce that many droplets. But if there's a sea of people and they're confined in a small space, the aerosols will become a soup of viruses. The typical size of a droplet produced in a human cough is between 0 and 200 microns. The World Health Organization uses 5 microns as the dividing point between a large particle and a small one. This is also the dividing line between droplet transmission and aerosol transmission. When evaporation occurs, liquid droplets become solid droplet nuclei. These droplet nuclei can suspend in the air for a week and then drift away with the wind. The farther the droplets travel, the less concentrated the particles become. Along with social distancing, face masks are one of the easiest, cheapest, and most effective ways of protecting yourself in this pandemic. There are a wide variety of masks on the market, from windproof cotton masks that also keep you warm, to paper masks used during cleaning, to activated carbon masks for absorbing organic gases. More people are also turning to homemade designs. In an emergency, any mask is better than nothing, but not all masks are created equal. What are the best masks for a pandemic? We'll examine 2 of the mainstream masks. First, the N95. The N95 mask became well known in the 2003 SARS epidemic. It's made up of multi-layer non-woven fabrics with polyurethane and polypropylene. These fibers are not woven, but randomly arranged and tangled through a special process that's better at blocking small particles from passing through. The N stands for non-oily particles, so cooking fumes, for example, are not included in the scope of protection. 95 means at least 95% of very small particles, size 0.3 microns or larger, will be filtered out. Why 0.3 microns? Irving Langmuir was an American scientist who designed the radiation-proof dust filter for the Manhattan Project that produced the first nuclear weapons. Langmuir concluded that particles that were 0.3 microns in size were the most difficult to filter out. Particles smaller than that are so lightweight and have weak inertia, so they move in a way that make them more easily captured. The average diameter of the novel coronavirus is 0.1 microns. The virus does not travel in the air alone, but through an infected person's droplets. And the smallest droplets are 1 to 5 microns in diameter, so they cannot pass through the N95 mask. At the core of the N95 is a material called melt-blown fabric. The concept comes from volcanic eruptions. Pele's hair and Pele's tears describe volcanic glass fibers and glass drops that form in and around erupted volcanoes. Another inspiration from nature comes from silkworms and spiders. Their cocoons and webs are Mother Nature's version of melt-blown non-woven fabrics. In the factory, the raw material for N95 masks, polypropylene, flows out in a melted state. Through the cooling and spinning process, the fabrics are formed on net curtains and rollers. The masks get a high-voltage electric field treatment. The masks now have static electricity, which traps particles in the air. With the fine mesh of the fibers, the static electricity further adds to the filtration capabilities of the N95 mask. The N95 looks simple, but it requires a certain way of handling it to make sure you're getting the full benefits. Using clean hands, place the mask over the nose and mouth. First, fasten the bottom band, and then the top band around the neck and head. Finally, press the aluminum nose clip, moving from the center of the nose outwards. When fit properly, the mask should be leak-free and airtight. When wearing an N95, there should only be a tiny rise and fall of the mask when the person is breathing or speaking. For medical workers exposed to the virus and in close contact with patients, the N95 mask has become a necessary part of their PPE, or personal protective equipment. Since the pandemic started, the use of N95 masks among U.S. medical staff has increased 15-fold. Although the N95 is efficient at blocking particles, it may not be for everyone. Our lungs are like bellows that are constantly expanding and contracting. When the diaphragm moves up, the muscles contract and lift the ribs, expanding the chest. When the air pressure in the lungs is reduced below the atmospheric pressure, air flows into the lungs. We inhale. Conversely, when the diaphragm relaxes, our lungs return to their original size and we passively release the air in the lungs. Since a mask is a physical barrier on the respiratory passage, it will inevitably make it more difficult to breathe. Studies have shown that when someone wears an N95 mask, the resistance to breathing increases 126% for inhaling and 122% for exhaling. In other words, it requires more effort to maintain a normal airflow. Research shows that wearing an N95 mask continuously for 4 hours results in a 37% decrease in the volume of air exchanged. Side effects include fatigue, dizziness, headache, and heat stress. Wearing a mask during physical activity can also lead to a shortness of breath. People with weak cardiopulmonary function should be very cautious when choosing to wear N95 masks. You may have seen N95 masks with an air window. This design allows the user to exhale air, but without filtration. This kind of mask is effective in filtering out dust and particles and haze while allowing for more unburdened breathing. But when it comes to the prevention and control of a virus during a pandemic, these masks allow viruses to escape freely, offering no protection for others. The other kind of face mask that's gotten a lot of attention during the pandemic is the surgical mask. This mask is also a popular and economical choice during the pandemic. It consists of 3 layers of non-woven fabrics. The outer layer protects against water and body fluids. The middle layer is a melt-blown fabric layer and intercepts particles in the air. The inner layer is a soft, water-absorbent layer. Surgical masks are non-combustible, and this is a way to test if the mask is genuine or a counterfeit that may not meet protection standards. The mask also provides a good barrier against droplets. The surgical mask sits relatively loose on the face compared with the N95, therefore offering a lesser degree of protection. But droplets have a hard time making turns, so they will still get anchored and trapped by the mask fibers. For daily protection in the public, surgical masks are safe, cheap, and effective. Also, it's best to reserve the N95 mask for medical professionals. It's important to know how to wear the mask correctly. First, with clean hands, hold the left and right laces and place them around the ears. The colored side of the mask should face outward, and the aluminum nose strip should be on top. Press the nose clip into place with both index fingers. Stretch the bottom to cover the chin so half of the face is covered. Once the mask is secured, try not to touch the mask with your hands. As we breathe, plenty of dust, droplets, and microorganisms will adhere to and get embedded among the mask fibers. The general use time of a surgical mask is 4 hours. Then it should be discarded and replaced with a new one. To discard a used mask, spray it with alcohol to disinfect it before placing it in a garbage bag. Almost all pandemic guidelines recommend not reusing a mask. But in the case of a shortage and a need to reuse disposable masks, some health officials have suggested placing the mask in a paper bag or another container that doesn't retain water. If it's a short trip out and the mask hasn't been stained, you should be able to reuse it. Placing the mask in direct sunlight or another UV light source can disinfect it. "2020 will go down as an unforgettable time in history. Time will be divided between before the pandemic and after. Wearing a face mask is just one sign of the new normal we find ourselves in, and we'll start developing new customs and new habits from this experience. And despite pushback from some Europeans and Americans to wearing one, the face mask has come to symbolize individuals doing their part for a greater good, a recognition of the collective interest in stopping the spread of COVID-19, a message of solidarity. A study in the journal Lancet found that wearing a face mask can reduce the risk of infection from 17.4% to 3.1%. Communication and culture are already changing because of the pandemic. Humans rely on facial expressions to understand each other. How will we convey these visual cues behind a mask? And will we start to develop new ways of communicating? And as masks become a staple in our everyday lives, how will artists, businesses, and fashion brands make the most of this moment? Health officials say that this pandemic won't be the last. In the years to come, masks will undoubtedly continue to be a daily necessity. In a time when people are dying, the economy is upended, and life as we know it no longer feels familiar, putting on a mask seems like an act of empowerment, empathy, and ultimately hope that perhaps one day we will be able to take off our masks. In the big picture of global health, face masks have made a profound and lasting impact.